everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. The Bengals rather pinch pennies than pay the price that it costs to win the Super Bowl. Instead of going out there and big game hunting, getting the best players available, paying the price that it costs to build a championship team, they rather go out and great value hunt, try to find the best bargain. And they expect for Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, a three-man team, to carry an average to below average roster to a Lombardi trophy, and that's just unrealistic. You don't want to pay your best player on defense in Trey Hendrickson, who led the NFL in sacks last year at 17.5. If you would have taken Trey Hendrickson off of Cincinnati's defense last year, they would have went from 25th in sacks to dead last in the league in that department. That's how big of an impact Trey Hendrickson had on this Bengals defense. With the secondary that has a lot of question marks at corner and safety, having a top-tier pass rusher that can win those one-on-one matchups makes life a lot easier for you on the back end. Not only do they not want to pay Trey Hendrickson, but they refuse to pay the guy who they drafted in the first round to replace him. Shamar Stewart was right about everything he said pertaining to the Bengals organization. They care more about winning arguments than they do winning Super Bowls. And it shows with how they go about their contract negotiations. They expect for Joe Burrow to be Mr. Perfect, essentially. Joe Burrow, this season, for the Bengals to not just make the playoffs, but have a shot at making another Super Bowl run, he has to throw 50 touchdowns and only 3 interceptions. He has to play damn near flawless for the Bengals to be a playoff team and to get back to the Super Bowl. And as much as I love Joe Burrow, he could play for the Bengals for 2 more decades and never come anywhere close to winning a Super Bowl as what he did in his second season, because it looks like that Super Bowl run that the Bengals had a few years ago was a little bit of a fluke, because this organization is in a division where you have the Steelers and the Ravens, who consistently win, not because they are able to find great values in free agency, but because they're able to draft and develop really well, and they pay their core guys. The Steelers are going to pay T.J. Watt. They paid Cam Hayward. They've paid Minka Fitzpatrick. The Ravens have paid Marlon Humphrey, Lamar Jackson, Ronnie Stanley. They are paying the most important players on their team and not trying to be cheap. You can't win in the NFL trying to assemble a team from Dollar General when you're going up against teams that are shopping at Gucci, Prada, and a Louis Vuitton store. Hell, when you lost to the LA Rams in that Super Bowl, they said F those picks. They weren't trying to build through the draft and try to save money. No, they were running up that salary cap, going in and getting Jalen Ramsey, trading for Von Miller, and they also got OBJ in the trade with the Browns. They got Matthew Stafford. The Rams made the moves that you are supposed to make when you're all in on winning a championship. Same thing with the Philadelphia Eagles. They were willing to pay what the Giants were unwilling to pay to get Saquon Barkley. And look what that addition got them. Their second Super Bowl in franchise history. No team in the league wins by the way that the Bengals are trying to just find these great values hanging on the rack in the thrift shop and thinking that that's going to be enough to suffice when you have a predominantly 3-man operation and Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. As good as what these guys are, they need a lot more talent around them for the Bengals to be a consistent contender and a consistent winner and the NFL's toughest division. The Steelers are going to be better than the Bengals this year. Not because of the addition of Aaron Rodgers, but because they have solid quarterback play, they've drafted well, and they have an overall more complete team than what the Bengals do. The Bengals being unwilling to spend big money in free agency is why this roster is in the state that it's in. You have a new defensive coordinator in Al Golden, and you think that he's going to be able to make up for the lack of talent on this side of the football? Lou Anarumo went from being a finalist for several head coaching jobs 2 years ago to all of a sudden getting fired now on the Indianapolis Colts. And it wasn't all because of him. You don't fall off because you forget how to coach within the span of 2 seasons. Part of Lou Anarumo's demise in Cincinnati was the front office being unwilling to retain Jesse Bates, who in Atlanta has still remained an all-pro safety. They've been unwilling to keep some of the core guys around who are responsible for their Super Bowl run because they choose to be frugal instead of being on the aggressive, going on the attack, shopping at the premium outlets. They think that you can win just being cheap. And what does getting cheap get you in this world? You get cheap results. When you go out there and you buy cheap clothes, they don't last that long. When you pay $20 for some knockoff AirPods, the audio quality isn't good. And when you have a cheap roster, you go 8-9, despite having a better quarterback than the Steelers, you finish third place in this division. It's a quarterback-driven league, but it still is a team sport. And it doesn't matter if you have 3 high-level guys, if the rest of your roster is comprised of guys that you found off the shelf at the Dollar General. Shamar Stewart was right about everything he said about the Bengals front office. They care more about winning arguments than they do winning Super Bowls. They rather say, we can win being cheap than pay the cost that it takes to win a Super Bowl. This man, Colin Cowherd, hates Aaron Rodgers and the Steelers more than Skip Bayless hates LeBron. Colin cannot stop being wrong about A-Rod and the Steelers. He's been wrong about this franchise for the past 5 years and counting. Just because Aaron Rodgers is 41 years old and he's teaming up with a defensive-minded coach doesn't mean that they're going to be unable to have success. Mike Tomlin has won with quarterbacks these past 2 seasons that would have gotten a lot of head coaches fired if they had to start them. He went to the playoffs in 2023 with Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, and Mitchell Trubisky. Last season, he made it to the playoffs again with Justin Fields, who still is living on potential, off half a decade in the league, and a washed Russell Wilson. The floor with Mike Tomlin is 9 wins. So imagine if you get Aaron Rodgers, who can be better than what Mike Tomlin has had at quarterback since Big Ben retired. All the Steelers need for Aaron Rodgers to be is a top 15 quarterback, and that'll be good enough for this team to win at least 10 or 11 games. Now, if Aaron Rodgers shakes back into the form that we saw before he joined the Jets, and he can pull off a Brett Favre arc, then possibly the Steelers can win more than just a playoff game or 2. That's what the ceiling is with Aaron Rodgers. 13 wins with the possibility of maybe making it to the AFC Championship game. We know that the Steelers know defense. The defense is always going to be good. But the reason why the highest paid defense in the National Football League has come up short during the second half of the season isn't because of Mike Tomlin being inept to put an elite defense on the field come playoff time, but due to this defense being worn out because the offense has been so inefficient due to below average quarterback play. Mike Tomlin has continued to go into gunfights with a plastic knife at quarterback. When you're in the AFC, a conference that's home to aliens like Josh Allen, Lamar, you're not going to win with a Wash Russ and Mason Rudolph at quarterback. You need some competent quarterback play, which is what Aaron Rodgers is still good enough to give the Steelers. And what's funny is that Colin Cowherd was ranking all of the quarterbacks in the AFC that he would take over Aaron Rodgers. Geno Smith, CJ Stroud, Bo Nix, and I would take Bo Nix over Aaron Rodgers at this point in his career with how good he looked in his rookie campaign. But Geno Smith and CJ Stroud were not better than Aaron Rodgers last year, at least according to the stats, when Aaron Rodgers threw more touchdowns and had a better touchdown INT ratio than what both Stroud and Geno Smith had. And CJ Stroud, you can say that he regressed last season. He fell victim to the sophomore slump during the regular season. Geno Smith was a turnover machine. There is a reason why the Seahawks were willing to trade him away to the Raiders and replace him with Sam Darnold. And I would even say that Geno Smith is a winning quarterback when Aaron Rodgers was on an organization that has consistently struggled to win over the last decade. The last time the Jets had a winning season, Todd Bowles was the head coach. That was nearly a decade and some change ago. Aaron Rodgers, as good as a quarterback as what he has been throughout his career, he can't overcome a dysfunctional franchise. It takes more than just having good quarterback play to win on a team like the Jets. You need good coaching, which Aaron Rodgers didn't have. There were several games last season that the Jets lost due to coaching. When you consistently have special teams mishaps, untimely penalties, it's a sign that you're a poorly coached team. With Aaron Rodgers coming to the Steelers, playing for Mike Tomlin, where the floor is incredibly high at 9 wins, if he can just be decent, the Steelers not only can win the AFC North, but they can finally end their near decade-long drought without a playoff win. And then what's even more head-scratching is that Colin Cowherd ranked his top quarterback and head coach combos, and he has Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert, when Jim Harbaugh hasn't won a playoff game in over a decade. Justin Herbert has no playoff wins. Justin Herbert plays his best football in the regular season and saves his worst ball for January. So how is Herbert and Harbaugh on this list over Mike Tomlin and Aaron Rodgers, where you have a quarterback that has won in the playoffs within the last 5 years, and you also have a head coach that has done more with less? Drake May and Mike Vrabel, what has Drake May proven? Yeah, he showed a lot of promise in his rookie season, but you're putting him over Aaron Rodgers, a guy who is a 4-time MVP, a 4-time All-Pro, and last year in the games that I watched, Aaron Rodgers was better than Drake May, and you don't even have Drake May ranked above Aaron Rodgers on your AFC quarterback rankings. And are you telling me that Mike Vrabel is a better head coach than Mike Tomlin? If anything, he's Mike Tomlin 2.0. What has Mike Vrabel won as of late? He had that one Cinderella run when the Titans made it to the AFC Championship with A.J. Brown and the tank that is Derrick Henry. And after that, they slowly regressed the few seasons after. And he doesn't really know offense all that much. That's why he got fired by the Titans, because he was inept at getting that side of the ball right when he lost Arthur Smith to the Atlanta Falcons. And then you have Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow on this list above Aaron Rodgers and Mike Tomlin, when Mike Tomlin, the past 2 seasons, has been playing meaningful football in January. Meanwhile, Zach Taylor has been at home. And you can say that Joe Burrow got injured in 2023 and he had to win games with Jake Browning, understandable. But Mike Tomlin has been winning with quarterbacks on the same level as what a Jake Browning is. He was making it with Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, and Mitchell Trubisky, who are not too far off from Jake Browning. If you give Mike Tomlin Jake Browning, the Steelers still can win 9 games, but Zach Taylor couldn't even make it to the playoffs with that. He couldn't even sustain a above 500 record without his star quarterback. And even last season, they had a worse record than the Steelers, the same team that you believe is going to finish below Cincinnati, who got worse on defense. They don't want to pay their best player on that side of the football. They don't want to pay the guy who they drafted to replace him. And they also lose Sam Hubbard to retirement, and they cut Jermaine Pratt, who led that team in tackles last season. Colin Cowherd's hate for Aaron Rodgers and the Steelers is blatantly obvious. He can deny it all he wants. But as the old saying goes, what's in the dark always comes in the light. And by every segment, Colin Cowherd continues to put out slandering Aaron Rodgers and the Steelers. He continues to show his hatred for Aaron Rodgers in Pittsburgh. This is a team that has won a bare minimum 9 games with some of the worst quarterback play in the league. Mike Tomlin has the best record out of active head coaches right now with backup quarterbacks. So imagine if he can just, for once, get some top 15 level quarterback play. That's all the Steelers need. And if they can get that, which they will, Colin will once again be wrong. He's been predicting the Steelers' downfall wrongly for over half a decade. 2020 was supposed to be Mike Tomlin's first losing season. The Steelers still made the playoffs. Same thing for 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Colin still hasn't learned that. At this point, he's just throwing darts at the wall and hoping that he can eventually strike a bullseye, which I doubt that will be the case this year. And he'll once again next year be right back at it, I promise you, picking the Steelers to miss the playoffs again, and Mike Tomlin once again having his first losing season. The Steelers haven't had a losing record in over 22 years. That's one of the longest streaks, and not just the NFL, but in the entirety of sports, without a losing season. The Steelers culture, although it may be outdated, it still wins a lot of games, and it has more success than the majority of operations that we see being ran right now in the National Football League. The real recognize the real. That's why Warren Moon blessed Cam Ward with that #1 jersey. Warren Moon just didn't unretire his jersey for no reason. He has a lot of similarities to Cam Ward. In some capacity, you can say that Warren Moon sees a lot of himself in Cam Ward. They both were under-recruited coming out of high school. Cam Ward was a 0-star recruit. Warren Moon had to go to a low-ranked college to start his collegiate career before he finished off at Washington. And then he went undrafted, had to prove himself in the CFL, and then eventually got his shot in the NFL. Same thing with Cam Ward. Although he didn't go undrafted, he went first overall. Cam Ward was the most disrespected first overall pick in NFL history. He goes #1 overall after all the blood, sweat, and tears that he put in. And the only thing that was talked about when he was on that stage getting picked was Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. As a Miami Hurricane fan, Cam Ward brought me my greatest memories ever being a young Canes fan. He masked a lot of problems with Miami last year. If you would have took Cam Ward off of that Hurricane squad in 2024, that's an 8-win team at best. He consistently brought that team back from behind. He was able to outscore opposing teams when he had no defense at all. If you would have stuck Cam Ward on Ohio State or Oregon, he easily would have won the Heisman Trophy. He was the most prolific quarterback in the history of Miami football, and the lone season that he played for that program, he shattered every single season Miami record for a quarterback. And when you see a quarterback have to prove himself like how Cam Ward did, transferring 3 different times, every single one leveling up, and the amount of difficulty and competition that he was going up against, that's a sign that you have a special player. When you have players that overcome adversity early, before they even hit the pros, it's a sign that you have a player that is wired differently mental. Jalen Hurts, when he was coming out of college, his mentality was the reason why I believed he would have been a good quarterback in the NFL, regardless of him getting benched for Tua, regardless of him having to transfer to Oklahoma. He was able to overcome those setbacks, and he was able to blossom into a really good quarterback. Same thing with Bo Nix. He overcame adversity at Auburn, goes to Oregon, revitalizes his career, and look how good his rookie season was. Same thing with Jaden Daniels, had to transfer from Arizona State. You remember when his teammates would call him sorry, they was trashing his locker when he left. Quarterbacks that overcome adversity normally tend to perform at a high level in the National Football League, because no matter how difficult stretches during the season may get, they're always are going to find a way to overcome those. Just like how Warren Moon had to overcome a lot of adversity throughout his career, from being a black quarterback, entering the league at a time where African-American quarterbacks weren't really all that accepted. He had to dominate in the CFL to finally get an opportunity to show that he can play with the big boys. Warren Moon knows that Cam Ward is built different. And he never would have brought that number 1 jersey out of retirement from him to wear if he didn't see something special in Cam Ward's eyes. Every time Cam Ward stepped on the field for Miami last year, you believe Miami could win against any team they played, no matter who they were lining up against. Because he just has a different level of aura and confidence about himself that's contagious, and his teammates feed off that. Mario Cristobal said when Cam Ward first arrived at Miami, his first week, he already earned the respect of his teammates. He was snapping on them in the weight room. And why his teammates responded well to Cam Ward's antics at times was because they could tell the kind of player and person that he was. He isn't just somebody that's going to bark at you and not hold his own self to that same standard. He expects not just the most from himself, but from his teammates, from his coaches. When he talks trash, he's not just doing it for fun, but he's talking trash to his teammates because he wants to bring the beast out of them. He wants to bring the dog mentality out of everybody in that locker room. And that's why Cam Ward is going to end up having a rookie season just as good as what we saw Jaden Daniels have this past year. Because quarterbacks that overcome adversity, that time after time have to beat the odds, they normally tend to be really good in the NFL. You don't go from a 0-star recruit out of high school to the number 1 overall pick if you didn't have a different kind of work ethic from everybody else. The difference between Shedeur and Cam Ward is that Shedeur had the ability to train with some of the best position coaches. He was able to train with Tom Brady. Cam Ward had to get everything out the mud. He didn't have access to Tom Brady's guidance. He didn't have access to some of the best coaches that Deion was able to pair Shedeur with. That's what makes Cam Ward different. He knows what it means to work hard. He just has an attitude and a mentality about him that Warren Moon can see he's destined to be nothing but great at this level. And that's why he blessed him with that jersey. Every Buccaneers fan knows that this team has a Super Bowl caliber roster that's being held back by a mid-caliber head coach. The Bucs have a top 5 roster entering this upcoming NFL season, but they have an average coach in Todd Bowles. And average coaches don't go far in the playoffs. The furthest you can get with a guy like Todd Bowles on the sidelines is the second round of the playoffs, because the teams that go the furthest in the postseason aren't always the most talented, but they are always the most well coached. There's a reason why we've seen great head coaches win championships with average quarterbacks, but we haven't seen elite quarterbacks win Super Bowls with average coaches. Coaching is the difference when you get into the playoffs. When you are able to capitalize playing in the worst division in the NFL, you don't need to be a great coach to win the NFC South. You can just win that division outright because you have a more talented roster than everybody else. And even then, Raheem Morris beat Todd Bowles twice last year with Kirk Cousins, who got replaced for Michael Penix. That should tell you everything that you need to know about how this season is going to go for the Buccaneers, because the Falcons had a good enough roster that is on the same tier as what the Bucs were last year. Even if the Buccaneers had a few injuries, the margin still wasn't that wide between the two from a talent discrepancy. But the difference in those games was coaching. And before last season, you didn't have any other team in this division that rivaled the Buccaneers in talent until the Falcons got Kirk Cousins, they got Darnell Mooney, and they had some really good drafts, getting guys like Bijan Robinson and Drake London. The Falcons are going to dethrone the Buccaneers for the NFC South this year because the Falcons have a better head coach than Todd Bowles. And Raheem Morris isn't even that good as a coach. You can say that he's like a Diet Coke version of what Todd Bowles is. But he's been able to get the best of Todd Bowles due to being better in late game situations, which is the biggest reason why the Buccaneers can't win a Super Bowl with Todd Bowles as their head coach. Situational football matters in the postseason. And we saw Todd Bowles lose several one-possession games last year due to poor clock management, his team just unraveling with either a costly turnover like that fumble they had early in the fourth quarter against the Commanders in the wild card round, when they were unable to get Mahomes and company off the field in the overtime during their Monday night matchup. The Bucs had the worst record in the NFL last season in one-possession games. They were 2-6 because of Todd Bowles' incompetent coaching. And don't even get me started on how his defenses got carved up by the rookie quarterbacks that they went up against in Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels. You got the best of Jaden Daniels when you played him the first time, but when he saw you twice, he beat you when it mattered the most. You could not stop him on fourth down, and you could not get the Commanders and Jaden Daniels off the field in the most crucial moments of that game. Jaden Daniels was essentially throwing routes on air against Todd Bowles' defense when he's supposed to be a defensive-minded head coach. You lost to Bo Nix. And if you want to take it back a step further, in 2023, you got carved up and let C.J. Stroud drop 400 yards and 5 touchdowns against you. When you are a defensive-minded coach, a rookie quarterback should never have this amount of success against your D. Todd Bowles, until the Buccaneers fire him, the Buccaneers are going to continue to come up short relative to the amount of talent that they have on their roster. They have one of the most complete teams in the entirety of the NFL, and yet they can't get no further than the second round of the playoffs. The only playoff game that Todd Bowles has won since he replaced Bruce Arians was against a depleted Eagles team that was down their top receivers and was going into the playoffs cold after starting that year out 10-1. We've seen what this team has done when they've gone up against teams that have the same talent as them or a tad bit better, and that's come up shy of being able to win those games because of coaching. When they lost to Dan Campbell and the Lions, the difference was who both teams had on the sidelines commanding their teams. The Bucs had Todd Bowles. Dan Campbell, coaching the Lions, has been one of the better coaches in the NFL for the past 2 years. Coaching is the difference between teams that win Super Bowls and teams that underachieve relative to the talent that they have on paper. And this reminds me of a similar situation that the Cowboys were in when they had Jason Garrett. Although the Cowboys didn't have Super Bowl caliber rosters with Jason Garrett most of the times, they had good enough teams to where you expected more postseason success than what they were able to have with Jason Garrett as the head coach. He was good enough to win a weak division most of the time because the Eagles weren't really that good. Neither were the Commanders and the Giants consistently. So he was able to get you the 10-12 wins, and come playoff time, you were an easy first-round exit because of poor coaching. But meanwhile, you look at Kansas City, who had the best record in the NFL in 2024 in one-possession games, despite not being as talented as the Bills, the Ravens, and even the Buccaneers. They were able to win those one-possession matchups because of coaching, because Andy Reid was good in late-game situations. He had a good understanding of situational football, something that Todd Bowles really struggles at. So this season, I expect to see the Buccaneers take a step back. They're on their third offensive coordinator since Todd Bowles has been hired. The offense should regress. And his team as a whole, with the division ramping up in talent, the Panthers are better. The Falcons are just as good as what the Bucs are. I don't see this team making it to the playoffs, and I don't see them sniffing anywhere close to the Super Bowl, even though they have a roster that's good enough to do so. There are 5 teams that y'all keep hitting the snooze button on, but when the season kicks off, they're going to drag you out the bed. I want to give you guys 5 teams that everybody is sleeping on entering the 2025 NFL season, starting with the Jacksonville Jaguars. With the hiring of Liam Cohen as their head coach, he's going to be able to reboot Trevor Lawrence. There's a reason why the Jags made him one of the highest paid QBs in the league, and it wasn't because they were blindly putting faith into his potential. It was based off what he did a few seasons ago when he led this team to an AFC South title and a playoff win over the Chargers. He showed that year the ability to play some high-level football. Now, ever since that playoff win, his play has dropped off, more so due to his inconsistency and the bad play calling that the Jags were getting from Press Taylor. Liam Cohen had the Buccaneers offense performing at the top 10 level. Baker Mayfield had the most efficient season of his career with Liam Cohen calling plays. He also improved a Buccaneers defense that a season before he arrived was one of the worst in the NFL. So with Liam Cohen calling plays, you can expect for Trevor Lawrence to play some way better football than what we've seen him play these last couple of seasons. You also got Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter, who should end up being one of the best wide receiving duos when this season concludes. And although the Jags don't have a great defense, they got enough players that they should be good enough on that side of the ball to where, as a team, they can win 9 games or more this season. The New York Jets. Aaron Glenn took this job because the Jets gave him the best chance to win right out the gate with the amount of talent that they have on defense. They have a great secondary. We all know how good Sauce Gardner is. They got a loaded defensive line with a bunch of first-round picks that they've used to ramp up that pass rush. And on offense, they're just as good on that side of the ball as what they are on defense. They've invested a lot of high draft picks into that offensive line. You got Garrett Wilson, one of the better receivers in the league. You got a really good stable of running backs. And Justin Fields, as weird as it is to say this, because the Jets are a place where quarterbacks' careers go to die, the Jets are the best situation that Justin Fields has been in up to this point in his career. So there's a chance where we could see Justin Fields have a Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield kind of arc where he lands in the right situation with the right coaching staff that believes in him, and he ends up finally breaking out. So the Jets are a really underrated team because the talent is already there for them to win. It just all depends on how good Justin Fields ends up being. The Chicago Bears, they're not really a sleeper team by what most people's definition of what a sleeper team is, but they're a sleeper team to me because I think that the Bears will end up having the best record in the NFC this year. They have the new Sean McVay and Ben Johnson, who's going to be able to get Caleb Williams playing at an MVP level this year. And when that happens, with how stacked the Bears are on defense, especially with Dennis Allen being their defensive coordinator, they're going to be one of the most complete teams in the NFL this year. They already had a top 10 defense under Matt Eberflus. But what held them back is that the offense was very inefficient. And when you have an offense that struggles to sustain drives, you put the defense on the field for more plays than what they should be, and they end up getting worn down over the course of the season. But with the improvements that Ben Johnson has made on the offensive line, giving Caleb Williams presidential security up front, and how loaded they are at receiver, this is going to be a prolific offense with a very good defense. And the Bears, not only do I have them winning the NFC North, but I have them possibly making it to the NFC Championship game. We normally don't see first-year coaches have that amount of success, but Dan Quinn did it last season with the Commanders when nobody expected them to go that far. And Jim Harbaugh did it his first season nearly a decade ago, his first year coaching the San Francisco 49ers. The Bears were already a team that was built to win last year. Now that you have fixed your biggest problem, which was your poor coaching, you're going to surprise a lot of people this year. The Pittsburgh Steelers, like the Bears, they're not your typical sleeper team. Most folks believe the Steelers will be a 9-win team, but if Aaron Rodgers ends up having a Brett Favre kind of arc where he leaves the Jets, a quarterback graveyard, and he ends up being able to somewhat be 80% of what he was in his prime for his final merry-go-round, this is a team that not just can make it to the playoffs, but they can win the AFC North over Baltimore. And on top of that, they can win a playoff game or two if Aaron Rodgers can give them top 12 or better quarterback play. And if he just completely reverts back to the form we saw him in Green Bay, then the Steelers are Super Bowl contenders. Now, I'm not going to go that far, but they are a lot better than what the national media is giving them credit for. I don't see this being an 8 or 9 win team. I see this possibly being a 13-win team max, with the floor being 10 wins if Aaron Rodgers still is the shell of himself that we saw last year with the Jets. And I got the Titans because although they're not as talented as the other teams on this list, they got Cam Ward. And Cam Ward is immediately going to make this a better football team because he's going to be better taking care of the football than what Will Levis was. Although he's a rookie and rookies are prone to make a lot of mistakes, Will Levis just made a bunch of stupid decisions with a bunch of reckless plays, especially in the red zone. And the Titans have a really good defense. Their defense was a lot better than what you may think, because Will Levis was always putting them in unfavorable situations with his reckless football. You also got a really good group of skill position players around Cam Ward. Calvin Ridley is incredibly underrated. Expect him to have a big year with Cam Ward at quarterback. Alik Ironmaner was one of my favorite receivers in this past year's draft, and he's going to be seeing Travis Hunter again. And Alik Ironmaner, he's the Travis Hunter destroyer. The last time he went up against Travis Hunter, he put 200 on him and a few touchdowns on him as well. And you also have Xavier Restrepo, who Cam Ward already has a lot of chemistry with. And let's not forget about Tony Pollard, who's a really underrated back. And with Bill Callahan being the offensive line coach for Tennessee, he's one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL. This is a team that is good enough to have a similar season to what the Commanders had. And while I say similar, I'm not saying they're going to make it to the AFC Championship, but they're a team that coming in, your expectations are fairly low, and by the time we get to Week 11, Week 12, you're like, damn, like, what did I miss with Tennessee? So these are my 5 biggest sleeper teams that are going to drag y'all out of bed and wake y'all the hell up, because they're going to surprise a lot of people with how they're going to overachieve and exceed expectations. Players show up late, they fake the grind, and then wonder why the Miami Dolphins always fold late during the season. So Bradley Chubb came out and said that the team lied last year about wanting to have a winning culture because they essentially stuck their toes in the water, but they didn't dive all the way in, and they gave half-ass effort. And what did that get them in return? They got half-ass results, not making it to the playoffs. They refused to buy into the new culture that Mike McDaniel was trying to implement, and they essentially quit on them. And Mike McDaniel, as likable as a guy as what he is, he's on the hot seat, not because he's a bad coach per se, because he has had Tua playing some really good football. His offenses have been really good. But what he lacks is the ability to get the respect of his locker room. At the end of the season last year, he came out and said that players, despite how much they find them, still continue to show up to meetings and practice late. Why was that? Because they didn't respect Mike McDaniel. Nobody would ever think of showing up to Mike Tomlin or John Harbaugh's meetings late unless you simply didn't care. And that's why Mike Tomlin got rid of George Pickens. He wasn't bought in. He isn't a championship-winning player. And Jalen Ramsey and Tyreek Hill, which are the 2 players that Mike McDaniel was indirectly referring to, with your 2-star players who get paid more than anybody else on your roster come into the facilities late, it sets a bad culture and a bad precedent for the rest of your team, because it makes everybody else feel that they can walk over you too because you're too soft. They can't take nothing that you say seriously. That's why they didn't take their fines seriously. Because look at the coach. When you look like Leonard from the Big Bang Theory, how can anybody in that locker room take you seriously? And these statements that Nick Chubb put out, Mike McDaniel responded to him, and he essentially brushed them off. He said, we're not worried about last season. We're worried about this upcoming season, when he should be worried about these statements, because it pretty much shows that the Dolphins aren't going to be good this year because this team doesn't know what it takes to win, and that Mike McDaniel is going to be one of the first coaches to get fired come Black Monday. And this just reminds me of what Vic Fangio said when he left the Miami Dolphins. He essentially was coaching a bunch of kids who didn't respond well to tough coaching, and they wanted to be coddled. And when he left, the Eagles end up winning the Super Bowl, and the Dolphins end up coming up short of making it to the playoffs, and the defense somewhat dropped off as well. And a lot of players were celebrating when Vic Fangio left because they didn't like his style of coaching. Well, the reason why they didn't like his style of coaching is because look who the head coach is. Mike McDaniel doesn't coach the Dolphins tough. That's why they can't win games in the cold weather months. They come out hot during September and October, but once you get into the real football season that gets played after Thanksgiving, they got to go on the road to Lambeau Field and they're freezing to death. They're unable to win those games because they don't have the toughness in order to do so. And I'm not just referring to their offensive line and defensive line not being good, but I'm just talking about from a basic mentality standpoint. They're soft. Because if you can't take to hard coaching, how are you going to respond in freezing cold conditions when you're a team that normally is playing in 70, 80-degree weather in most games, and the environment that really tests your mental capability, your mental toughness? Mike McDaniel can't win the big games because his team doesn't respond to big game atmospheres. They don't respond well to being in big moments because they haven't been coached up and conditioned well enough to be able to thrive in those big moments, to win those big games, to beat teams like the 49ers or the Buffalo Bills. The biggest win they had was when they came back on the Baltimore Ravens a few seasons ago. That's the only good team I can remember the Miami Dolphins being able to beat. Outside of that, I don't really have too many memories that I can go back to when I can recall the Dolphins actually looking like a team that was as good as what they always look on paper. And even going into this season, although I'm down on Miami, the roster still isn't really that bad. You did have a bunch of injuries. Getting Bradley Chubb back is definitely going to help out that defense. But the offensive line still isn't that good. And you still are a track team. And that's why Mike McDaniel, with him being able to get the respect of his locker room and the players to buy in to having a winning culture, is ultimately going to lead to his demise at the end of this season. And he will be one of the first things smoking on out of there when they end up underachieving and missing the postseason once again.